Hi, everybody. Welcome to Christian Homestead. My name is Jared, and boy, do I have some news for you. I don't know if you've already seen this or not. Let me know in the comments below. But we're looking at newsroom on the church website, temple to be built in Portland, Maine. Okay, so I was shocked by this for a couple reasons. Number one, I think I speak for all of us that we were a little bit disappointed that we didn't get any temples announced in the last general conference, right? And I don't know about you, but I figured, okay, the next time that we'll hear of any new temples, it's probably going to be the next general conference. I think that that's something that's probably going to stay the same, that President Oaks will continue what President Nelson did and always announce temples during general conference. But no, uh, not with this. And then I was also surprised that it was Maine, because I have a map for temples. It's hard for me to kind of keep on top of it, actually. But I've always been very interested in the locations of temples. And I've been particularly interested in U.S. states. And Maine has been one of these states that are the last to get a temple. Before moving here to Independence, Missouri, I lived in Kansas. And Kansas was also part of that list until, gosh, I think it was 2022 or 2023 when the Wichita, Kansas temple was announced. And then Kansas left that list. It hasn't been dedicated yet, but it has been announced, and it's getting close to completion. So, okay, the temple will be the 383rd worldwide and the first in Maine. Now, if those two things aren't shocking enough, there's more. At a Christmas devotional held for Latter-day Saints and friends of the Portland, Maine stake on Sunday, December 14th, 14, we talk about this number somewhat frequently. It's 7 times 2. December 14th, 2025, Elder Alan D. Haney, United States Northeast Area President, read an announcement from the First Presidency of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints of a temple to be built in Portland, Maine. Quote, "We are pleased to announce the construction of a temple in Portland, Maine. The specific location and timing of the construction will be announced later. This is a reason for all of us to rejoice and thank God for such a significant blessing. One that will allow more frequent access to the ordinances, covenants, and power that can only be found in the house of the Lord, the First Presidency." So, of course, officially, it's being approved and announced by the First Presidency. But as far as the general membership of the church finding out, it's actually being delivered through someone other than the president of the church, someone other than an apostle. The article notes this will be the first temple in Maine. And then it says, as part of the announcement, Elder Haney shared that, quote, "In a recent meeting of the First Presidency of the Church, a decision was made that, when directed by the First Presidency, the announcement of the construction of a new temple should be made on location by a member of the Quorum of the 12 Apostles or a member of an area presidency," end quote. He added that such an announcement by a member of an area presidency has never occurred before. Tonight will be the first. Okay, so that is super interesting. That is super interesting. I've decided to go ahead and add this to my spreadsheet called Timeline Preparing the Church for the Second Coming, because I have this list of changes that the church has made where it feels like it's just part of this series of changes. There's been like a flurry ever since President Nelson has become president of the church, like major changes. And this is another one of them. I don't know that it necessarily has to do with the second coming. As you can see in column D, I haven't put anything in this cell for the effect. For a lot of these other changes, I've explained how I think that this is helping prepare for the second coming in the millennium. A lot of it has to do with, global synchronization across the church, making things more simple for a large influx of converts at the beginning of the millennium. This one, I don't know. If you have any thoughts of what I should put in this cell, if anything, please put it in the comments below. let's take a look really quick. I added this to my spreadsheet uh, called Timeline Second Coming. So this is my most recent event. I don't typically record when temples are announced on here, but I do record when temples are dedicated. So because this is it seems like it's a major milestone, a big change from how the church has announced temples, I want to take note of it. And I think that it could be significant. I just don't know exactly how. Um, and then I have two spreadsheets that track the announcement of temples. I put this together, I think it was just earlier this year, just a few months ago, because a lot of times we focus on when temples are dedicated, but I wanted to know when they're announced, because I wanted to answer the question, are they always announced during General Conference? Because it's something that's a question that I hadn't really focused on until this channel. In fact, I kind of assumed like, oh yeah, of course, you go back in time and I'm sure that they've pretty much always been announced during General Conference with some exceptions. That's what I thought until I did this exercise. And it turns out, no, no, not even close. So, uh, we've already noted on the channel before this point, before putting together this spreadsheet, that the last time that a temple was announced outside of General Conference, it was the Ephraim, Utah temple. It was announced on May 1st of 2021, okay, by President Nelson. What's really interesting is I have this spreadsheet called Prophets Talks. I wanted to keep track of various things about President Nelson's talks because through the process of time, I started noticing very interesting things that he was doing with his talks. There were patterns. And one of the things that I noticed as I put this part together over here is that, okay, so this is broken down by General Conference, okay? So here's his first General Conference, April 2018. You have the number of times he spoke. You have the number of temples that he announced. And so I wanted to kind of keep a running tally of the number of temples that he announced, which ended up at 200. And it turns out that the 70th temple, okay, 70, we know, if you've been watching this channel, you know that President Nelson had a very special relationship with the number 7, or in this case, a multiple of 7, 70. It came up a number of times during his presidency. It came up in his social media posts. I have a whole other spreadsheet for President Nelson's 7s, and it seems like this is one of them. So all the temples that he announced were done in General Conference, with the exception of the 70th, and it was the Ephraim, Utah temple. And I feel like the Ephraim, Utah temple is actually a special temple. I may have to look into that more in the future, but I feel like it's special not just because it's the 70th, but because it's the Ephraim, Utah temple. Even just the name of it. I know it's because of Ephraim, Utah, obviously, but we all know that in this last dispensation, Ephraim, the tribe of Ephraim, has this special role to play to gather a scattered Israel. So I don't know that, but anyway, let's go back to this spreadsheet. So the next time before that, that I can tell, I'm just assuming that all these ones here in blue were during General Conference. I didn't verify necessarily, but it looks like they were all during General Conference. So the last one before the Ephraim, Utah temple that I'm aware of that I can easily tell is this one, the Payson, Utah temple, January 25th, 2010. So this would be during President Monson's presidency. And then 2 before that, December 13th, the Trujillo, Peru temple. And then before that, you can see that it seems like announcing it during General Conference was the exception rather than the rule. Just look at these cells that are in this light blue color. Okay. So these are the one. Actually, you know what? When I made this spreadsheet, maybe I did verify for sure if these were General Conference announcements. Yeah, let's say that. I'm sure that's why I highlighted them in blue. Okay. So you go back here. Here's all the temples that were announced by President Hinckley, and a very small percentage of them were announced in General Conference. So when I put this spreadsheet together, that actually shocked me. I've been a member my entire life, but I guess that's just something I didn't pay attention to back then. And it makes sense because I guess back then that was the norm. So it's not like it stood out. It's just like, oh, this is how it is. And then slowly over time, especially once President Monson becomes president of the church and President Nelson, then it switches over to announcing them during General Conference. And then that's normal. And you just don't really notice the transition unless you have a podcast like this, which didn't really exist until like podcasting in this style didn't really exist until the last, within the last 5-10 years. And then if you go further back, yeah, it's like all temples were announced outside of General Conference for the most part. Dang, these ones might be during General Conference. I'm sorry that I'm kind of shaky on which ones were announced during General Conference. I think I may have missed these last couple. October 3rd, the Laie, Hawaii, and Mesa, Arizona temple. And then you go back. Here's an October 6th, the Logan, Utah temple. And then the Salt Lake temple is the first one that I have announced on this list. But actually, if you go even beyond that, you have the temple here in Independence that's supposed to be built in the future, the primary temple of the New Jerusalem. That was the very first temple that was announced. And then, of course, you have Far West and Adam-ondi-Ahman. And then you have the city of Seth that's between Far West and Adam-ondi-Ahman. So anyway, this is how it's gone. And then here it is by year. This is a separate spreadsheet which focuses on the total for the year. So for 2025, we're at 16. And I guess now we have to ask, is this going to be the last one for the year? Because it seems like at this point, temples can be announced at any time. So for all I know, maybe there is going to be another announcement by the end of the year. At this point, we're about halfway through the month. So we'll just have to wait and see. So keep your eyes peeled. Okay. That's all for the spreadsheets. The Salt Lake Tribune notes that the remaining states that don't have a temple are Delaware, Mississippi, New Hampshire, Rhode Island, Vermont, and West Virginia. I have a feeling that that's not going to last long. Okay, if we go back to this last General Conference, let's review what President Oaks said in his talk called The Family-Centered Gospel of Jesus Christ. He said, as of the April 2025 General Conference, President Russell M. Nelson had announced the construction of 200 new temples. He loved to announce new temples at the conclusion of each General Conference, and we all rejoiced with him. However, with the large number of temples now in the very earliest phases of planning and construction, it is appropriate that we slow down the announcement of new temples. Which, by the way, this obviously implies that, of course, there are more temples that are going to be announced, and I don't think that's going to stop all the way until the end of this world when the earth becomes celestialized, all throughout the millennium. But anyway, therefore, with the approval of the Quorum of the 12 Apostles, we will not announce any new temples at this conference. But then you could put like a little asterisk and be like, but we will, in a couple months, and it's going to be in a way that you've never seen before. And that's actually going to become the new norm. We will now move forward in providing the ordinances of the temple to members of the church throughout the world, including when and where to announce the construction of new temples. That's kind of interesting. Okay. Including when and where. When and where. So they must have already been having these talks back then. I didn't notice this the first time. Including when and where. And Elder Haney said, In a recent meeting of the First Presidency of the Church, a decision was made that when directed by the First Presidency, the announcement of the construction of a new temple should be made on location by a member of the Quorum of the 12 Apostles or a member of an area presidency. So there's a hint that they were talking about this as going as far back as October 2025. Okay. And then I don't know if this has anything to do with it or not, but you'll remember President Nelson's talk. This is closing remarks, the April 2019 General Conference. He said, "Brothers and sisters, we regard a temple as the most sacred structure in the church. As we announce plans to construct a new temple, it becomes part of our sacred history. Now, please listen carefully and reverently." Let me highlight that. Reverently. "If I announce a temple in a place that is special to you, may I suggest that you simply bow your head with a silent prayer of gratitude in your heart. We do not want any verbal outbursts to detract from the sacred nature of this conference and the Lord's holy temples." And I don't think it was a huge problem, but it was kind of distracting. And I understand people getting excited. I myself got excited when the Wichita, Kansas temple was announced. And in that same conference, it was like, for me, it was 3 in 1. It was the Wichita, Kansas temple. It was the Austin, Texas temple, which when I was in the Army, I was stationed at Fort Hood, and that would have been our closest temple. At the time, we had to go to the San Antonio, Texas temple. So Wichita, Austin, and then the Spain, Barcelona temple. And that's where I served my mission. So for me, that conference just blew my mind. And I don't know if I would have been able to restrain myself if I was at the conference center. But there was like a period of time there where I don't know how many conferences, but it's, excuse me, it seems like maybe, for 3-4 conferences, you would have people in the conference center that would like yell and everybody would laugh, oh, they're excited and how cute and how fun. But yeah, it's distracting, and that's not how we do things in the church. We have times that are reverent times. We don't do clapping, after musical numbers, because it keeps an atmosphere of reverence. And that's one thing that I really like about our church. There are times when there's clapping, like when is there clapping? I know that I've clapped before at church events. Where do we clap? It's not during like official church meetings, but I know that I've clapped somewhere. I have this memory. Let me know in the comments below. When is the last time you clapped at a church event? And then I wanted to end with this. I recognize the name Elder Alan D. Haney, and I think it's because at the very least I have him on my spreadsheet for Second Coming quotes. So I have a quote from him from the April 2023 General Conference. Let's go ahead and read this, and then we'll wrap up. His talk was called "A Living Prophet for the Latter Days." "Whether we like it or not, all of us were chosen in some fashion in the pre-earth life to be born in these latter days. There are 2 realities that are associated with the latter days. The first reality is that Christ's church will be reestablished on the earth. The second reality is that things are going to get really challenging. The scriptures reveal that in the last days, there will be a great hailstorm sent forth to destroy the crops of the earth, plagues, wars and rumors of wars, and the whole earth shall be in commotion, and iniquity shall abound." When I was a child, those prophecies of the last days scared me and caused me to pray that the second coming would not come in my lifetime. It's interesting that he confided in us and shared that. We've talked about this before, why it seems like sometimes people don't want to talk about the second coming. And I think there's a whole myriad of reasons, but this is one of them, is people are afraid. And I think sometimes it's because they only think of the second coming happening one way, or they have preconceived ideas, or maybe they haven't researched it enough, or whatever. And that's, it's understandable. We all learn over time, and I think the more that you learn, the more hopeful you become about the second coming. But anyway, so scared me and caused me to pray that the second coming would not come in my lifetime. With some success, I might add so far. But now I pray for the opposite, even though the prophesied challenges are assured, because when Christ returns to reign, all of his creations will, quote unquote, lie down safely. And then I have some of his footnotes because I liked a lot of the things that he said here. Footnote 11, Hosea 2:18, for I will reveal myself from heaven with power and great glory with all the hosts thereof, and dwell in righteousness with men on earth 1,000 years, and the wicked shall not stand. Current conditions in the world have caused some to panic. As God's covenant children, we do not need to chase after this or that to know how to navigate these troubled times. We do not need to fear. The doctrine and principles that we must follow to survive spiritually and endure physically are found in the words of a living prophet. I really like that because in this LDS Second Coming niche, I feel like there's certain ideas out there that float around that no, you have to know the secret things. You have to buy somebody's book, or you have to know the secret interpretations if you're going to endure physically. A very small percentage of people know how to survive physically. And that's not true. It's not true. Listen to the living prophet. Okay, footnote 13. So this is a quote from President M. Russell Ballard. For behold, they have rejected the words of the prophets. Wherefore, if my father should dwell in the land after he hath been commanded to flee out of the land, behold, he would also perish. That is why President M. Russell Ballard declared that it is no small thing to have a prophet of God in our midst. And then later, President Russell M. Nelson has testified that quote, God's long established pattern of teaching his children through the prophets assures us that he will bless each prophet and that he will bless those who heed prophetic counsel. Keep in mind, he's saying all this in the context of the second coming. If you want to prepare for the second coming, if you want to learn about the second coming, we should look to the prophet and the apostles and church leadership instead of people's private theories that speak over the prophets. Okay, footnote 15. Let's see. Russell M. Nelson, Ask, Seek, Knock. This is the October 2009 General Conference. No man can be more happy than by obeying the living prophet's counsel. End quote. So the key is to follow the living prophet. Footnote 16. This is from the teachings of Harold B. Lee. Quote, keep your eye upon those who preside in the church today or tomorrow and pattern your life after them rather than to dwell upon how ancient prophets may have looked or thought or spoken. Oh yeah, because that's another problem is a lot of times people that really get deep into the second coming and develop pet theories, they'll basically stick to their interpretation of the scriptures. And then when modern prophets say something that contradicts their theory, their add-on, their whatever it is that they've come to believe, then they'll dismiss modern prophets and be like, no, the real thing, it's in the scriptures, the prophets today, whatever. And no, prophets are prophets. President Oaks is no less of a prophet than Isaiah or John, the Revelator, or anybody. Okay. And then continuing, let's see, footnote 16. Oh, we already read that part, but then there's a second part. Brothers and sisters, unlike vintage comic books and classic cars, Prophetic teachings do not become more valuable with age. That is why we should not seek to use the words of past prophets to dismiss the teachings of living prophets. So we have to understand that if we had a certain way of interpreting a scripture, and then we have a prophet that comes along that seems to contradict that, the approach that we should take is my understanding was incorrect. The way that I read it was incorrect. It's not up for us to interpret scripture for the entire church. You can definitely understand the scriptures, but sometimes when it gets kind of sticky, whether it's prophecy or maybe, it's a current social issue, because like some people, like putting the second coming aside, some people will read the scriptures and want to reinterpret them to fit a social narrative or a political narrative. And we need to make sure that we're sticking to the correct interpretation of scripture, because if not, then we're no different from all these other Christian churches that have their own way of interpreting scriptures. And that's why you have a million different Christian churches. You can't just point to the scriptures and be like, well, it's in the Bible, because then it's like, well, this denomination over here, they don't agree with it. And they read the Bible. I read the Bible. So it's the living prophet that keeps us all on the same page. Okay. And then the last footnote, 17. President Spencer W. Kimball once observed that, quote, they who garnish the sepulchres of the dead prophets begin now by stoning the living ones. And then from Ronald A. Rasband, The Things of My Soul, the most important words we can hear, ponder, and follow are those revealed through our living prophet. Okay, so you just never know what's going to happen at any given moment. I definitely wasn't expecting to hear this. My wife was on social media and she's like, oh, did you hear about this? And I had to like ask her again. I was like, what did you just say? They just announced a temple. And she said the part about like the Christmas devotional and it being Elder Alan D. Haney. And I was just like, what? Are you serious? Well, I guess I know what my next video is going to be. So anyway, again, we're living in very exciting times and I can't wait to see what the next thing is going to be. But just the interesting things never stop. Okay, well, that's going to be it for this one. I'll talk to you guys later.